Chris usually gives me a bio for whoever the speakers are, but I think we know Bryce well enough to do away with that. Bryce is a three-time Emmy Award winner. Three? You haven't got the fourth one, have you? Three-time Emmy Award winner. He has also won every teaching award that the university gives, I think. He retired, and he's so good that they wouldn't let him retire. He came back and he's still teaching even though he's retired. I'm not sure how that works. He's been doing a lot for us, as Chris mentioned. If this whets your appetite, come to sign up for his 7-week long course on history of gardening, part 2. It's really, really fascinating stuff. What we like most about Bryce is he is also our pinch hitter here at the Arboretum. Whenever a director leaves, Bryce comes in as interim director. No announcement. I'm not going anywhere, so you're safe for now. We will keep you just teaching. But please help me welcome Bryce to talk about the history of gardening.
Good evening. How's it going? Are your plants as excited about spring as mine? I'm trying to tell them, calm down, please, calm down. I'm getting a little bit nervous. Thank you for the invite, Chris. This is, I guess, a marketing tool, right? We're using this to advertise for the class. You know, a few seats are left. So here's the story. First of all, I want to thank Mark and thank Chris, because the other day I came in for my class, Botany of Gardeners, and I was given by Chris a name tag that said J.C. Ralston Arboretum Instructor. That's so cool. I tell people now, I'm on the faculty of the J.C. Ralston Arboretum Educational Program. That is so cool. And one of the things that one of the great things that Mark talked about when he interviewed for the position here was that he had a vision for the education programs here at the Arboretum. He wanted to expand them and get people in that are not just your typical JCRA plant geek people, but to try to open up and show the community that there's a whole lot here, and there's a whole lot about gardening. And so there's some really, just beside me, there's lots of other really great courses and good instructors that are coming through. So I'm excited about the future of the education program at the Ralston Arboretum. Now, to that end, Mark, Chris, when was it? Was it last fall? We taught the first history course?
Yeah.
Was it last fall? Was anybody in the history of gardening class? See, we got some, it was last fall, wasn't it? It was back then somewhere. Yeah. You know, history, I can't keep track of dates. But it was a 7-week course, and it was kind of entitled something like this: The History of Gardening, How Cultures, Events, and People Made Gardening What It Is Today. And we stepped out on faith. We thought, I don't know how well that's going to go over. You know, gardeners, avid gardeners wanting to sit down and listen about, during the course of human history, what kinds of things happened, what kinds of things happened in certain cultures, and how did certain people and what they did affect what we call gardening, and whether that would have any application at all. And we had 25 people in that class, and we had fun. And when the class was over, they said, do another. And so now in 2 weeks, we've got more history of gardening, and you don't have to have taken the first one to take the second one, because you could spend a lifetime studying events, cultures, and people in the course of human history, and things they did, things that happened, events, occurrences, political things that influenced horticulture, what we call gardening today. So Chris asked me to come and just kind of give a little tease, okay? And so I have like 3 hours of tease today. Okay? So sit back. After dinner, talk on history. This will be great. You'll all be wide awake. And so that's what we're gonna do. And I can't begin even in an hour to capture all the history. I can't even begin to do that in a 7-week course that meets two hours each week, or another 7-week course that meets. It's mind-boggling. And so you are at my mercy as to the stories I'm going to tell you tonight. Okay? Because tonight I want to talk about a series of snapshots. That's what it's going to be. It's going to be a snapshot. It may or may not be chronological. I don't care. All right? What I care most about is that you listen to the stories. because here's something that I feel really strongly about. How many of you are gardeners? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So as gardeners, would you not agree that this craft that we call gardening has this incredible ability to create stories? Okay, and within the context of those stories, help us develop and enhance and form relationships. Okay, so gardening as a craft goes way beyond just the plants and the soil. All right, and that's just my experience as a gardener. Okay, for instance, take this guy right here, Atlee Burpee. Okay, here's a guy, all right, who let me get the date right. I wrote him down. 1858 he was born. Okay, came from Canada. His family came from Canada, in the Philadelphia area. He's 16 years old. He's just gone to the Philadelphia Exposition. He tinkers with genetics. Like most kids, right? He tinkers with genetics, and he doesn't care about plants. He's all about chickens. Chickens and pigs. And so at 18, his parents sent him off to college to study medicine. And within like a month, he comes home and he says, I'm not doing that. I'm not interested. Can you imagine the heartbreak? His parents, they sent him to school to become a doctor. And they said, well, what do you want to do? He says, I want to breed chickens. That's what he said. And I want to create a mail order chicken company that will send chickens to farmers. So his mom gave him $1,000. And she loaned it. $1,000. That would be equal to $22,500 in today's dollars. Okay, loaned him $1,000 and said, "Go do your chicken mail order," and he did. And two things happened. They're not exactly sure which one convinced him to start selling seeds. But what happened? First of all, the farmers loved his chickens and his pigs because he bred them. He just didn't grow them. He bred them, and so he tried to improve these pigs. And chickens. But what he also realized was that they wanted feed for these animals. Seed. Okay, and so he started to grow that, and he also realized that to ship a pig was expensive, right? And that shipping seed was a lot less expensive. And so in 1880, Burpee says, I think I'm going to tweak my company a little bit. I'm going to still, kind of play with animals, but I'm going to start growing seed. Okay, because these farmers started to ask for vegetable seeds, and then their wives started to ask for flower seeds, and before you know it, before the turn of the century, Burpee Seed Company was born. Isn't that fascinating? Here's a kid who didn't want to go to med school, but he'd rather breed animals, ends up, founding this huge seed company that we know as Burpee Seeds. So that's an example of a person and an event that occurred that changed the way we garden. Because think of all the mail order seeds. Oh, by the way, one of the things Chris and I talked about, I think we're going to ask Denny Werner to come and guest lecture during the history section, because did you know he collects old seed catalogs? So we're going to ask him to do the seed lecture, the old historic seeds. But history's everywhere. You never know where you're going to find it. I was in Flat Rock, North Carolina. I was at a sod farm, okay? Not a pig farm, a sod farm, okay? We were shooting a show on how you can affordably create a lawn using sod. All right, and the owner of the farm was so nice. Frank Patillo was his name. He's a graduate of the Ag Institute. He took us on a golf cart up to the top of the hill in the nursery, and you could look out over the Appalachian mountain range. And he said, "I want to show you something." Right? And he said, "Is that not cool? It's a white oak. Quercus alba," and he actually crawled underneath. I took his picture. He's on his hands and knees here, and then I said, "Wait a minute, this might be good for a talk someday." And here it is. So then he says, "Do you know what happened here?" And I said, "Well, yeah, there was a little oak seedling growing here, and a storm came, and a big tree fell down on it, bent it sideways. There's polarity, and so the thing bent and turned and went up." And he said, "Oh, I never thought about that." But come to find out, Native Americans about 200 years ago, this was GPS. Native Americans would take saplings in the woods, and to show travelers where villages were, water source was, different things, they would take trees and they would bend them over. Take a look. They would bend them over, stake it down with a twine. All right. Then you'd get a sprout that would come from the side. They'd lop off the rest. There's your polarity, and now this would say, okay, water's that way. So this is a 200-year-old GPS. Isn't that fascinating? Okay. and here I was thinking, oh, a storm came in a tree. I'm using all my scientific knowledge to think about, and yet people were using trees as a way to road map for other travelers. So where we, that's just to kind of whet your appetite. Now we have to talk about the Roman Empire. Okay? And I remember history. I didn't get interested in history until, gosh, when I was 40, 45, 50, probably last week. But as a kid growing up, as an avid horticulturist and gardener, history was not something that I migrated toward. Now I read fiction, I read fictional history. I'm interested in the history because I find fascinating the way, like, the Roman Empire, how that culture influenced what we call gardening today. And so here's a snapshot. I'm not claiming that the civilization or humans began with the Romans. We're not going back to the beginning. I don't want to go there tonight and have a discussion there. But I want to talk about the Roman Empire. I thought this map was really quite interesting. Everything in orange you see is the Roman Empire at the height of the Roman Empire. Quite fascinating to see how much influence the Roman Empire had. And I also want to point out, this is a little bit north of the border between Scotland and England, and there's a wall. And I've sat on that wall. And when I sat on it, I didn't have anywhere near as much appreciation for that I do now. I think it's probably a reflection of my age and history there. But if we look at the Roman Empire between 500 BC and 500 AD, we can see that there were certain emphases that they placed on agriculture that influenced what we do. Now, the funny thing about talking about history is that we talk about it with a 21st century brain. Does that make sense? And so, if I say, oh yeah, they improved on Egyptian culture, horticulture and agriculture, in that they improved irrigation, cultivation, and pruning. It's like cultivation. They actually realized that the Egyptians actually realized that if you played with the soil a little bit, if you disturbed the soil, that plants grew better than if you didn't. And we're all like, well, duh. But we have history on our side when it comes to understanding that that's really, that was a new idea. Well, the Romans improved on that. And the way they improved on it was they figured out a way to cultivate the soil without having to work hard themselves. Okay? In that the Roman Empire conquered lands left, right, up, and down, as you saw on that map. Labor was never a problem. So the idea of cultivation for weed control and disturbing soil for better root growth of plants was easily done because of so many peoples who were enslaved. All right, so that labor was not a problem. And they also created a whole lot of new technology. Take a look. First of all, I can't talk about the Roman Empire without walking the Appian Way and seeing ancient Rome from the Colosseum, and that, having the background of understanding the Roman agriculture and then going and visiting enhanced. But look at just a few of the things Roman agriculture did that contributes to what we know today. First of all, the first innovation that the Romans came up with was that they realized that there was a group of plants out there that they could use as a green manure. Okay? Now this was revolutionary. They weren't able to say, oh, well, these plants have the ability to fix atmospheric carbon from the atmosphere. No, they just realized that there were a group of plants that if they planted them and plowed them back in, that would enhance soil fertility. So first, green manure users. Second, they also realized that the animals, their waste could also be used as a fertilizer, as a way to improve soil structure as well. Okay? These were revolutionary to think before plants were just being planted, seeds were just being planted into whatever soil was there. Then they started cultivating it, then they started growing green manures, and then started adding animal manure to increase yield. Okay? And then the idea that you would cultivate to manage weeds. The idea, the concept that other plants growing with your crop plants would compete for water and nutrition. And so they invented the first hoe, okay, called a sarculum. These are some anthropological digs found these sarculums. These were the first hoes, all right? What I find fascinating is when I use the word hoe with a group of you like this, no one flinches. Okay? But when I teach 100 college students, freshmen born year 2000, and I say, so you're out in the garden with your hoe, they have a whole different view of what that means. And so I have to back up and I have to explain a hoe is something, because most of them never ever held a cultivator in their hand. So now I use the term sarculum. It just works a whole lot better. But I just find this fascinating that this was the formal agriculture. We say, what about the horticulture? Well, here's something interesting. You know, horticulture, the word itself comes from Latin, all right? So it has Roman derivation. And within Rome, there were two types of horticulture, all right? There was the hortus. And the hortus was a kitchen garden that was located near the living space. And that was really lower middle class Romans. Okay? Everyone had a hortus. And the hortus was where you planted food to feed your family, the backyard garden, the beginning of the backyard garden, and you added flowers. You added flowers to that. Okay? Hortus. That wasn't to be confused with horti. Okay? The horta was, or the horta or the horti was a large-scale pleasure garden, and these were gardens that the wealthy grew or planted near their homes, or better yet, far away. In fact, the horti became weekend getaways for wealthy Romans. Okay. Do you know what the name of the weekend getaway? You'd leave Rome and go to your weekend getaway. You'd leave the city of Rome and you'd go to your weekend getaway to tend to your horta or your horti. They were called suburbanum. Gee, what do you think about that? Going to the suburbs. Okay, the Romans were going to the suburbs on the weekends. So I think it's just interesting to see that the term horticulture, horta meaning garden, okay, meaning a place where there are plants, culture mean culturate, to take care of, to cultivate. Horticulture, the science of cultivating or taking care of gardens, comes from Roman culture. Roman gardening tools. Wouldn't you like a pair of pruners like this? Okay. Or a soil knife. And there was a harvesting tool, soil knife. There's my soil knife. I'm really happy that I don't have a Roman soil knife. Okay? But they had tools that they used within the context of their gardening. Now, within the context of human history, somebody should write a book called The Birth of a Greenhouse. Okay? Kind of like The Birth of a Nation. Could be a short film, The Birth of a Greenhouse. And in this book, there will be chapters that help us understand how we got the greenhouse we have today. So I'd like to share with you chapter 1 in The Birth of a Greenhouse. It would be entitled The Specularium. Okay? So here's a Roman Caesar. His name? Tiberius. He was a sick Caesar. And I don't mean sick like crazy. I mean he was ill. He had health issues. And his advisors told him that there was this Armenian cucumber that would help his ailments. And so he said, go get me seeds for this Armenian cucumber. He was the second emperor. He ruled from AD 14 to 37. I'm not sure that the cucumbers helped him. Okay? But he ate this Armenian cucumber daily to improve his health. Now, keep in mind, there was no way in Rome to grow this cucumber 365 days a year. The climate was not conducive. And so he told his advisors, okay, look, I need to eat this cucumber every day. You need to figure out a way to grow it. And so they planted these cucumbers in these big carts, and the servants would take the carts and move them to wherever the sun was shining. That's kind of a unique way to respond to a full sun location, is move the carts around. But in the wintertime, they had to be protected and still be able to bear fruit. Okay, and so what they would do is they dig a hole, incorporate it with stone, put these cucumber plants down in the hole, and then cover it with a translucent material. That became the first prototype of the greenhouse, the specularium. And the material, the translucent material, was mined. Anybody want to guess what it was? Mica. It was mica, exactly. It was covered with this mica mineral that was translucent. I used to play with it when I was a kid. I'd find mica and I'd peel it and you could look right through it. Well, these were large sheets of mica, and so Tiberius was able to get his cucumbers daily. I like to say, Caesar got his salad every day. I say it to my class of college students, they don't even laugh. And you know what? Caesar salad didn't come from Rome. Okay, there was a guy in the upper Midwest, either Indiana or Iowa, invented this salad. His name was Caesar. And so his name was Caesar. And so the salad he served at the restaurant that he was working, he said, this is Caesar salad. So next time you go to the restaurant, stop with a Caesar salad. Okay, say, I'll have the Caesar salad. And know that it came from the Midwest, not from Rome. Okay, but these are archaeological dig exhumed what they think are some of what's left of the specularia in that area. So that you couldn't have had the next chapter in the birth of a greenhouse without Tiberius and without him being sick. What if he was a healthy king? Who knows? Okay, now we're jumping. Okay, like I said, snapshots. And this is one of my favorite snapshots, one of my favorite stories. So we enter into the 1600s, you know, kind of post-Renaissance, Renaissance time where we have the formal French gardening being developed and these wonderful landscape designers are coming up with formal French gardening. Let's talk about our players. First, King Louis XIV. There he is, okay, called himself the Sun King. You all took history, you know why, okay? Because he believed that the world revolved around him. He did. He was so Louis XIV, so he's a king. He has a finance minister by the name of Nick Fouquet. There's Nick Fouquet. He looks a little bit sinister, doesn't he? What I love about talking about history, especially people of history, is to show a photo or a drawing or a painting of them, so we can look into their soul, right? We can kind of see a little bit, maybe what they were like. Okay. So there's Nick Fouquet. He was King Louis XIV's finance minister. Okay, and Nick Fouquet decides he's going to build a weekend home, right? And so he hires this guy. He looks quite bohemian, doesn't he? This is André Lenotre. Okay, Lenotre was this young landscape designer who was doing some really cool things in the landscape, and Fouquet learned of Lenotre, hired him to do the landscape around his weekend home. All right, so that's the setup. So here's the rest of the story. The home that was built was Vaux-le-Vicomte. I don't know, anybody been to Vaux-le-Vicomte? If you're in France, go. It's a fascinating place. This was Nick Fouquet's place. And this landscape design right here, very classic formal French gardening, not very colorful, hedges trimmed very geometrically, and the vista, the concept of the vista where you stand and you look and you take it all in. That was Lenotre's signature. So this took years. 15 years, let's see, 56 to 61. Okay, 8 or 9 years to build. Garden's done. Fouquet decides he's going to have an open house and invite all the royals to come, parasols, the whole thing, out in the garden, see the house, everything. And everyone's just all excited to go. He invites the king. Bad move. The king comes, walking through, he hears all the royals, all the wealthy guests, all oohing and ahhing on Vaux-le-Vicomte. Let's take a look. By the way, there's one of the early drawings that Lenotre put together for the garden. The basic idea, this would be the backyard porch, and that's called the Grand Vista. That concept, okay, was introduced through Vaux-le-Vicomte. All right, and so you can see how this is not atypical for French parterre gardening. Okay, now we go to French gardens and we see this kind of gardening, and what's filling up in between the hedging? Flowers. Okay, there were no flowers. The original French gardening didn't have a lot of color in it. It was more architectural, like you see here. Okay. This is an historic shot. I risked my life for this shot. Okay? Because when we toured my wife and I always have we have this agreement. I'll go in the house if she'll walk with me through the garden. And so that works. So we're on the tour through the house. And back then it was no cell phones. This was back in the early 80s. And so it's like, no photos. No photos. So I have my camera around my neck. This is back in the days of film. Y'all remember film? Okay, that should be part of history of gardening, film. Okay, so I have my camera right here, and we're walking, and somebody went to take a picture out the window or of a statue. No photos! I mean, they were militant about it all. And so I went over by the window, and I saw the Grand Vista. So I sneezed. And I took the photo. So that's the only photo I have of the garden from the inside. Okay, so guess what happened? They had this big open house, Everyone's thrilled, champagne, whatever, wine, the whole thing. And King Louis XIV is absolutely livid. He's so jealous, he's so angry. He conjures up this story. Nick Fouquet doesn't have enough personal money to have built this. He must have embezzled. And he throws Nick Fouquet in prison for the rest of his life. Takes possession of this, right? Fouquet spends the rest of his life in prison, and then Louis XIV says, hey, Andre, you're coming with me. I got this plot of land closer to Paris that I think maybe I want to build a palace, and I want you to do the landscape. Does this look a little familiar? Okay. A la Vaux-le-Vicomte, this is the Palace of Versailles backyard. 1662, it took 40 years to complete the garden. Okay, Andre Lenotre had a career, okay, between Vaux-le-Vicomte and Versailles. This is called the Grand Vista. From here back there, 1,500 yards or 1,500 meters. Okay, so you can get a feel for size and scope. Sculpture fountains all throughout this garden. Okay, how many been to Versailles? It's kind of, it's chilling, is it? It's just incredible, isn't it? But that's the story behind how it got built. Louis XIV just decided he was going to take over, and he was going to create something that was that much bigger and that much better than Vaux-le-Vicomte. And he never let Nick Fouquet out. But you can see within the context of the grounds, you can see a number of fountains. By the way, the hydraulics that run the fountains then still run the fountains today. Fountains are turned on one day a week, Sundays. It's called Fountain Day. And when you go, that's the only day you have to actually pay to go into the gardens. Every other day of the week, you can go in the gardens. It's like a public park. I'll never forget one of the second or third time we were on a field trip with students. We stayed in the city of Versailles in a motel that used to be the horse stables for Palace of Versailles. And my colleague and I would go out jogging. And we jog. I mean, can you imagine? I'm jogging in the Palace of Versailles, pinching myself. I was like, I can't believe this. But on Sunday, they run all the fountains and play classical music all afternoon. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. And there you can see the fountains running. Palace of Versailles had serious tree damage during some major hurricane-like storms in the past 30 years. But you can see the whole landscape map here of the Palace of Versailles. So, we get to chapter 2, speaking of the Palace of Versailles, and the birth of a greenhouse. And then chapter 2 would be called the Orangery. Now, the Orangery can be spelled this way or that way. Either way works. I've done my homework. And the Orangery was part of the palace construction, built in 1684 to 1686. And so as I come out the back door, the Hall of Mirrors, you know the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles where the Treaty of Versailles was signed. Come out onto the back porch, you look out the Grand Vista, and to the left you see a railing, and you see people standing at the railing looking down. And so you walk out, you go to the left, you come to the railing, and if you have a fisheye lens, you can capture the whole thing. But here is this wall that runs down, and here's this garden of subtropical plants. Lemons, oranges, grapefruits. Okay, lots of subtropical plants, many of which are over 100, 200 years old, all growing in containers. All right, so picture this. Back in the 1600s, King Louis XIV decides that he's going to help fund exploration to the new worlds. And so one of his explorers comes back and brings back these round orange balls. He says, look what I found. Where'd you get these? From the New World. What are they? They're called oranges. Takes one, cuts it open, gives it to the king or the queen. They eat it and they fall in love with the orange, the citrus. Okay? When the crate's empty, what did they tell the explorer to do? Go back and get more oranges. So they go back and get more. After the second time, what did they tell them the third time? Bring the trees back. Okay? And so they brought trees back, they brought seeds back, and this was the beginning of container culture in the 1600s. Okay. And these plants growing in containers. Now, they're subtropical. They don't live in a temperate region. And so somebody had to come up with an idea of a way to overwinter these plants. Not grow them. We're still talking about the birth of a greenhouse, not the greenhouse. And so that brings us to something called the Orangery. The Orangery is an underground structure. In the case of Versailles, it's a giant horseshoe-shaped underground building. All right? That these plants, displayed and grown during the growing season out in the open, all get taken and put in storage for the winter. In fact, there's the palace, looking at the Orangery, you can see this giant horseshoe shape. See these large windows. The light is not for production, it's not for the plants to grow, but to just keep it light enough to overwinter them. All right? It was built in 1663 and then expanded completely in 1684. It's 500 feet long, up, down, and back, 500 feet long, 42 feet deep, and 45 feet high. Underground structure. Winter temperatures are 45 degrees Fahrenheit unheated. Constantly right between 45 and 50 degrees, no matter what the outdoor temperature was. An overwintering structure. This is the precursor to the greenhouse. Chapter 2, in the birth of a greenhouse. Now, not all orangeries were underground. Okay, but an overwintering structure. And here you can see the one shot. The one thing that really bothered me the most was they would not let visitors to Versailles actually walk amongst the plants in the orangery. That was has been my biggest disappointment. But you can see how they bring them out. There's a tractor. They keep them irrigated, and back in they go. If you look, you can see these are all doors that swing open, and the plants all go back in for the winter. But throughout Europe, 1600s, early 1700s, you saw these buildings associated with large estates that were used as overwintering structures. Sometimes they weren't underground, sometimes they were full-fledged buildings, very large, thick walls with glass for the purpose of providing light and maybe a little passive solar. But the whole idea was not having it be a growing structure during the wintertime. So that's all I want to say about orangeries. I think I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the father of the binomial system, a man by the name of Linnaeus. Talking early 1700s, I believe he was born in 1707, lived to 1778, is a Swedish boy growing up in this little Swedish town. And I got to tell you a little story about him. They called him in the town, he had a reputation for annoying the mud out of people. Because he would run up to them with a handful of leaves and he'd say, look at the leaves that I found today. And then he'd start talking about them. They called him the little botanist. And I think they said it that way too. You're the little botanist, okay? Because he was just really aggravating. But once again, his parents wanted him to be a doctor. So he went off to school and he went to medical school and he became a doctor and he practiced medicine. Do you want to know what his area of specialty was? I just read this today, and it just like, oh golly, venereal disease. Yeah. Anyway, he practiced medicine for 2 or 3 years, and then went to the University of Uppsala and became a professor of medicine. And then after a few years of doing that, he became very disenchanted because he was, kind of this sideline botanist, naturalist, and they kept inviting him to give talks on plants and on animals and on classification and taxonomy. And so, there he is. When he was 8 years old, he was called the little botanist. But while he was at Uppsala as a professor of medicine and then ultimately became a professor of botany, he became very disenchanted with the way that all living things were classified by names that everyone would use, change. Sometimes certain plants or animals would have 3 or 4 common names. He felt it would be great to have a universal system for classifying animals and plants, and so he invented one, and we know it as the binomial system, all right? And you've made it when they start putting your face on money, okay, and stamps, all right? That's pretty cool. Perhaps we'll see Linnaeus on social media. But at the Chicago Bot Garden, much to my thrill, was a giant bronze statue of Linnaeus. He actually was born Carl von Linné, and then when he invented the binomial system to prove that it actually worked, Linnaeus went ahead and changed his name to Carolus Linnaeus to show that you can Latinize just about anything. And he chose Latin. He chose Latin as the language of the binomial system because it was not any country's national language, and therefore everyone would be equally inconvenienced. And the second is that he understood that Latin was one of the easiest languages to create new names, new words, and Latinize existing words in other countries' languages. And so it was a brilliant move there. But here's Carl von Linné, here's Linnaeus reaching out for flowers. So I said, please, took a selfie with Linnaeus. It's pretty good. But here's the plaque. Carolus Linnaeus, 1707, 1778, is regarded as the father of taxonomic botany. Swedish botanist is best known for creating a system to classify plants based on the number of reproductive parts. His system brought order to the entire scientific world, also helped establish a universal system for naming organisms known as binomial nomenclature, where the first term is called the genus, the second term the specific epithet, both terms together, the species. It revolutionized the way that plants and animals are classified and organized. In 1737, he first published the Genera Plantarum. 1741, he retired as or he was a professor of medicine, and then in 42, he resigned only to take a professorship in botany after that. And then in 1753, he published Species Plantarum, where over 6,000 plants were given brand new binomial names by Carolus Linnaeus. And the rest is history. Linnaeus has since rolled over in his grave thousands of times based on the way we humans have taken the binomial system and tweaked it, bastardized it, added other names to it. I believe that if he were back here, he'd probably be a little bit upset, but still thankful that the binomial system lives today. So Linnaeus played this huge role. What I love about the history of gardening when it comes to people is how people are connected. Okay? I think Kevin Bacon's in there somewhere. Okay? But take John Bartram. Here's this this man, farmer born in Philadelphia, okay, in the early 1700s, born in Philadelphia, farmer by trade, farmer, and in love with the natural world, and he got his hands on some publications by guess who? Linnaeus. So he taught himself the binomial system. John Bartram, Philadelphia farmer, self-taught, buddies with Ben Franklin. He was friends with some of the Philadelphia statesmen. First American-born plant collector. Okay, British colonies. First American-born plant collector. He liked to leave the farm and go on day trips, then on overnight trips into the wilderness. And you want to talk wilderness in the 1700s? We're talking about risk your life wilderness. We're talking about other people out in the wilderness who will kill you if they find you. Okay? He was so intrigued by plants, he went out and collected plants. He collected them up in the Pennsylvania area, down through into Maryland, traveled quite a bit. He was the first Linnaean botanist in the colony, self-taught, began applying the binomial system to the plants that he discovered in the colonies. He went to New England, Lake Ontario, Florida, he was all over the place. Had a good friend in England by the name of Peter Collinson. He was a Quaker, he lived in England. They were pen pals. You with me? Peter Collinson never set foot in the colonies. There's Peter. He must have had a bad day when they painted him. Okay, but there's Peter Collinson. All right, and so he was a gardener, he was a plant enthusiast, and between the writings between Bartram and Collinson, they conjured up an agreement. Collinson said, "Hey, when you discover a plant in the colonies, send it to me, and for every plant you send me, I'll send you a little bit of change. And this change will allow you to continue pursuing your passion." Does that make sense? Okay. He said on one condition, that you let me take credit for everything that you discover. And you know what John Bartram said? Sign me up. I'm good. How many of us would allow others to take credit for our work so we can continue to do our work because we love our work so much? Don't raise your hand because I'd have to think about that for a while. Okay? But that's how passionate John Bartram was about plants. All right? By the way, so what happened? So people, all the big horticulture folks, and even some of the royalty in England kept asking Collins and Peter, it's like, dude, where'd you get these plants? These are from the American colonies. It's like, well, how did you get them? Have you ever been there? No. Well, then what's going on here? Well, I get a box every 3 months. It's kind of like, when you, what is that company that sends the meals in a box? Blue Apron. Yeah, it's like Blue Apron. So John Bartram was like the Blue Apron for Peter Collinson. He said, every few months I get a box. It's called a Bartram box. He said, I open up the box and there's pressed plant things and there's seeds and I get all kinds of cool stuff. And they said, well, it's John Bartram that should be getting credit for this, not you. Peter said, oh, And so the king, King George III, said, "On this day I appoint thee, John Bartram, the king's botanist in the colonies." Isn't that cool? So the message that I bring to high school kids and college students is, look, find out what you're passionate about. Figure it out. Figure out what you're good at. Go after it. Be willing to volunteer. Be willing to let other people take the credit so you can do it. And someday the King of England is going to recognize it. No, but someday somebody's going to see. And when they see, your ship will come in. Don't worry about the rewards. Worry about the passion. And it happens. And that's exactly what happened to John Bartram in 1765. He became the king's botanist. King George III. And the Bartram box considered, was filled with 100 different seed varieties, dried plants, samples. You want to see what they look like? That's a Bartram box. Okay, this is a recreation of the Bartram box and what it might have looked like when Peter Collinson opened it. But that's one of the original Bartram boxes. So he'd ship those on the ship across the ocean to Peter. Could you imagine being Peter? It'd be like Christmas, when the Bartram box comes. Okay. Meanwhile, back at the farm, back at the United Kingdom, was this naturalist, botanist by the name of Joseph Banks, 1743 to 1820. All right, he was this naturalist, botanist. He ultimately was part of the first exploration of the Endeavour with James Cook, where they went to Brazil, Tahiti, Australia, and so Joseph Banks he introduced eucalyptus. We the first one to describe eucalyptus from Brazil. He introduced, not eucalyptus from Australia, bougainvillea from Brazil, okay, and actually named the plant after one of John Cook's French assistants by the name of bougainvillea. How cool is that, right? So if you're my friend, I might just name a plant for you, okay? And came back, and the horticultural community in the United Kingdom was so impressed with James Cook that King George III made him one of his personal advisors, okay? And he became very well renowned in royalty and ended up taking what was the royal palace and gardens and helped create it in the mid to late 1700s into what we know as Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. Okay. Not only that, but some of the plants he brought back, like all the plants in many 80 different species in the Proteaceae family, they honored him by naming that genus Banksia. So there are about 80 species that have Joseph Banks' namesake for a genus. Those are the Proteas. And then to honor his wife, Lady Banks, they named Rosa Banksiae, and there's Lady Banks Rose, and there's one of the many species of Banksia. So how cool is that? John Bartram's doing his own thing, and then there's Joseph Banks over on the other side. Now I got to go back to John Bartram because he had a bunch of kids, and one of his children was named William. And the literature says that John was very disenchanted with William. He wasn't very happy with William. Okay, and I dug, and I go, William was one of 5 kids. Why would he be so disenchanted? I couldn't find anything. And finally, I found a little shred. So this is speculation, okay? Fake news. Just speculation. What it did say was that William Bartram hung out with a lot of the revolutionaries. Okay, now remember who John Bartram is. The king's botanist. Okay, so John Bartram's bread's being buttered by the King of England, right? And his son is hanging out in taverns in Philadelphia with these rabble-rouser revolutionaries who are talking about making their own country. So I think maybe that might be, could you imagine the conversation between John and William? You're going out again? You're not going to be hanging out with those guys, right? That guy Jefferson really irritates me, right? Okay. But here's the fascinating rest of the story about William. Of all his kids, William caught the passion that John had for plants and actually traveled with his dad. And then when his dad couldn't travel anymore, traveled himself. So there are volumes where William, what an incredible writer, illustrator, explorer, where he explored all the way into Florida, southeast region. I'll show you a map of where William traveled. Here we go. So he was John's son, fifth of 9 kids, and William had a twin sister. He traveled with his dad 1765 and 66. Naturalist, artist, author. He wrote a book called Travels from 1773 to 1776. That they traveled all the Southeast. It was first published in 1779. I have a copy of that book. If anybody wants to borrow it, it's just as good as any novel as I've ever read. The man has the amazing ability to write. And you can see this is the trip. He came down through North Carolina. You can see all the places way down into Florida, okay, west, all the panhandle out there near Louisiana and back again. And this whole book, it records all his travels, some of his illustrations. Okay, he wrote about these plants and these animals, and he illustrated them. Okay, so I found myself on a trip to Gainesville, Florida. My wife was having some health issues, and the doctor that she needed to see happened to be in Gainesville. So we went to Gainesville to see the doctor, and someone said, oh, there's a great little village south of Gainesville called McCanopy. I guess that's how you pronounce it. McCanopy, and if you go there, they got a bunch of antique shops. And so we had a day before she had her appointment, so we went to McCanopy and we walked the shops. It was a lovely day, and sweet little setting. Okay. And then I came across the sign, McCanopy, Florida. The Timucua Indian village of the Potano tribe was located near here when the early Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto led his expedition through the area in 1539. Botanist William Bartram visited this village nearby in 1774. Oh my gosh, he visited. They have a plaque where he visited the first permanent white settlement in what is now Alachua County, blah, 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 blah. And I'm going crazy. I'm taking pictures, and my wife's like, what's going on? I said, John Bartram was here. I got that. He came to McCanopy. He's probably looking for antiques. And then we went a little bit further, and there was another sign, and it said William Bartram. And now sparks are flying, and my wife's like, what on earth? I read it to her. The great Quaker naturalist of Philadelphia made a long journey through the southeastern states in 1770s, collecting botanical specimens. In May 1774, he visited the Seminole chief cowkeeper, I love this, okay, at the Indian village of Cuscawilla, located near this spot. His book, Travels, I looked at my wife, I said, I have that book, okay, provided the earliest reliable account of North Florida landscape, flora, fauna, and Indian life, and his vivid images of local scenes inspired Coleridge, Wordsworth, and Emerson. Okay? So don't let anybody tell you that the toil that the effort that you make in your garden isn't connected to literature, poetry, music, relationship, because in history, it's all connected. How cool is that? You know you've made it when they got stamps. John and William Bartram, American botanists, father-son combination. Of course, there's the famous Franklinia, which is the plant that John discovered and wrote about. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move back to England for a little while, 1700s, early 1700s, and let's talk about the English garden movement. Oh, the little cottage gardens with lots of color. No, that's actually very young, okay? The old English gardens, like Stourhead. Let's talk about Stourhead. Here's a classic English garden. Okay, the classic English garden style, very simply, landscapers out there, very simply, make a pond of water and then cut a path and then put different kinds of elements in around the path and then have people walk around the path and create vistas where you look over the water and you see beautiful views, and then combine woody ornamental plants because of their foliage, their flowers, and their habit. Classic English garden style, Stourhead. And a banker, Henry Hoare, designed the garden in 1741. This pond is not natural. They dammed it up and filled it up from a stream. That's the famous Stourhead Bridge. There's the cathedral. The mansion's over here, but when I go to visit, I've been here 5 times, I walk by the house. Yep, okay. I'm going to the garden. It's an incredible walk around, okay? Henry Hoare and his father, they visited Italy a lot. They got a lot of inspiration from the Italian landscape. And the grandson, Richard Colt Hoare, enhanced the plantings toward the middle to the end of the 1700s. Okay, so let's take a look. Here's the whole concept behind Stourhead, and this is Henry Hoare's writing. The greens should be ranged together in large masses as the shades are in painting, to contrast the dark masses with light tones, and to relieve each dark mass itself with a little sprinkling of lighter greens here and there. Okay? And so as you walk through the path, a vista opens up, and there's oftentimes sculpture, but moreover just a unique combination of ornamental plants, and predominantly woodies. And as you come around the corner, this is the first scene. It's the one that always causes me to pause and catch my breath before I walk. Now please understand, I've been to Stourhead 4 times. I'm very blessed to be able to go. Each time I come, I start out and I go around, okay, clockwise. 5th time, I actually opened the brochure. Read a little bit in the brochure. It said the proper way to view Stourhead is anti-clockwise. Anti-clockwise, counterclockwise. That's the British for counterclockwise. I said, oh crap, I've been going the wrong way. So the next time I went, okay, there you go. See the arrows? Anti-clockwise. I've been going clockwise, right? I thought, oh, woe is me. So I went anti-clockwise. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you whether you go clockwise or anti-clockwise. This is a beautiful garden. And I can't really tell one wise from the other as to which is a better view. Because when you do walk, these are the kinds of views you see. Okay. It's absolutely fantastic. 2 different times, 2 different views. Thank you, weather, time of year. And then we had the opportunity to take students, and they got all excited. Take my photo in front of the rhododendron. And my question is, do you know where that plant is native? Where? Mountains of North Carolina. They grow better in England than they do in the mountains of North Carolina, rhododendron. So obviously planted land. So yes, it's a wonderful place. This you'll see on all the postcards, because this is called the turf bridge, because although it's a bridge of rock, it's turf. And that's very unique and different. So that's Stourhead. Oh, chapter 3, Birth of the Greenhouse. You ready for chapter 3? This chapter would be called The Great Crystal Palaces. The Great Crystal Palaces of the mid-1800s. And 2 things happened in the course of human history for the Great Crystal Palaces to be realized. 2 things happened. 1, in 1816, large central heating was invented, where they took a boiler and ran water and heated it up and then ran water through pipes. It was invented in 1816. That way, the orangeries could be heated and developed into structures that would allow plants to grow. We could heat them now during the winter. Secondly, plate glass was invented. Up until then, it was just small pieces of blown glass, but now in 1830, plate glass was invented. And so that started within the Royal European community, and even in the United States in the mid-1800s, the idea of the Great Crystal Palace, the conservatory, if you will, was born. Chapter 3. All right, so it's not uncommon. You visit the Edinburgh Botanic Garden up in Edinburgh. Probably this Botanic Garden, quote unquote, J.C. Ralston, the most underrated botanical garden in the world. And having been there, I would agree. I found myself there one day. It's free. It's in the middle of Edinburgh. It's free. Okay, you could walk in, walk through, beautiful garden. But I was intrigued by the palm house. This palm house built in 1857. I walked in. It was lunchtime. Walked in to look around. The place was empty. All the staff had left for lunch. At least I thought. I had the shock of my life. I went running over to save this person. It was a rubber suit that one of the workers had taken off for when they went to have lunch. So it's funny how you remember things that scare you. But within the context of the Great Crystal Palaces, I'd like to take you to Chatsworth Estate, which dates back, oh my gosh, back to the 1500s. It's a big, beautiful estate by the Duke of Devonshire. There have been a number of dukes. Okay, by the 1800s, the 6th Duke of Devonshire lived in Chatsworth, a beautiful, beautiful pleasure garden with lots of fountains. You can see the fountains. And can anybody tell me what famous movie's closing scene was shot right here on this terrace, looking back this way?
Downton Abbey.
Not Downton Abbey. Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darby. That right here. Okay. The only reason I know that, I've seen that movie 19 times. The one with Keira Knightley. Okay. Because, you know, I'm married to a woman and I have 2 daughters. And so this was on every other weekend. And I used to sit there with my arms folded like, when is this going to be over? But you know what? It's a really good movie. And I remember finally after like the fourth time, I was like, holy crap, that's Chatsworth. then it was a great movie. Okay. There is a huge pond that feeds the Great Cascade that was built in 1696. And at 9 o'clock every morning, they open the valve and this staircase fills with water. And it's great to get there early enough. The rolling hills kind of north of the Cotswolds. Okay. Oh, look, the bookstore. What's that got to do with history? What was it before it was a bookstore? An orangery. So even Chatsworth had an orangery. Okay, pleasure gardens where you could walk with rocks and nicely landscaped places, water elements, alleys. It's a wonderful place. But I really came to Chatsworth, or talking about Chatsworth tonight, to share with you about Sir Joseph Paxton. Joseph was born in, oh, you want to see him? There he is, a young man. 1803, 1865. He was the head gardener at Chatsworth in 1826. If you do the math, how old was he when he got hired? 23 years old, young man. Hired 23 to be the head gardener at Chatsworth by the 6th Duke of Devonshire. Hired him in 1825. He was even younger than 23. He was knighted before his death in 1865, and you'll find out why. He built the Great Conservatory. It took him 4 years to build it. He built it in 1840. At the time, it was the largest conservatory in the whole wide world on the Chatsworth estate. 34,000 square feet. He was the first to take the large Victoria lily, the large lily. It was the first one to cultivate it and get it to flower in the United Kingdom after it was collected and brought back to the United Kingdom in the Great Conservatory in Chatsworth. Okay. The 9th Duke of Devonshire, not the one that the 6th that actually became good friends with Joseph Paxton. That's Joseph Paxton as an older man. Okay. But the 9th Duke in 1919 blew up the conservatory. Kaboom! Because he was having trouble heating it, affording to heat it. So instead of just letting it lay there fallow, he blew the dang thing up in 1919. Sad state of affairs. Okay? So this is a little part of Joseph Paxton's diary. Look at this. I left London by comic coach for Chesterfield, arrived at Chatsworth at 4 o'clock in the morning on the 9th of May, 1826. As no person was to be seen at that early hour, I got over the greenhouse gate by the old covered way. In other words, he jumped the fence. I explored the pleasure grounds and looked round the outside of the house. I then went down to the kitchen garden, scaled the outside wall, saw the whole of the place, set the men to work there at 6 o'clock, then returned to Chatsworth and got Thomas Weldon to play me the waterworks, and afterwards went to breakfast with poor dear Mrs. Gregory and her niece, Sarah Brown. The latter fell in love with me and I with her, and thus completed my first morning's work at Chatsworth. Is that not awesome? Yeah, and so this is the Great Conservatory. Built it. Okay, most of the structure above ground was done with wood laminate and plate glass. 34,000 square feet. You can see some of the workers there. These are actual photographs of the Great Conservatory. This shows the foundation of the Great Conservatory today. The rest of it obviously had been torched by the 9th Duke of Devonshire. And then it's become an area where different gardens are planted from time to time. They give you a little bit of interpretation here. If you'd been standing here 150 years ago, you would have seen the largest, most innovative glass buildings ever. Tells the size. The walls you see surrounding the maze were foundation walls, supported 12,000 frames of ridge and furrow glazing. On Queen Victoria's visit in 1843, it was lit up by 14,000 lamps. No wonder she said, Mr. Paxton is quite a genius. And it was Queen Victoria who knighted Joseph Paxton for the work that he did on the conservatories. And I dare say the fact that he got her lily to flower probably helped as well. Okay? And so you could stand by the little placard and actually see what it might have looked like at the time. So, back in history. Okay, all those photos I showed you were taken in the 2000s. Back to 1983. I'm on a flower and garden tour of Europe on a bus. I'm the host, and we go to this place called Chatsworth, and we have an afternoon free to walk through. I'm walking through this Chatsworth. I see these lupins. I go gaga. I start to climb up on this wall to take a photograph of the lupins. There's an elderly man leaning over here. He's weeding a peony bed. He sees me, he turns. He's very old. He sees me, he turns. He comes running over with his hands up like this. No, no. My wife says to me, oh, you've done it again. And I get down. I said, I'm sorry, I didn't know. I didn't know. And he says, no, no, no. That's not the best photograph. I said, excuse me? He said, no, the best photograph is up on that wall. He said, then you'll get the whole garden. And so we got to chatting. Here was a man, he was the gardener of the great conservatory garden. 86 years old. Started working at Chatsworth when he was 16. Here was this young faculty member at NC State University in his 20s, thinking about going home to Massachusetts after 3 or 4 years because you're not a success unless you change jobs every 3 to 5 years. Learned a valuable lesson from that man who said that he lived his entire career working as a gardener at Chatsworth and couldn't have been happier and more fulfilled because he was passionate about what he was doing and he was good at what he did. And so that changed my whole perspective. And I'm still here at NC State. So I did climb up on that wall. And this was my first lesson in no. I don't mean no, get off the wall. I mean no, they won't grow here. You know, we go to England, you see a plant, oh my gosh, you try it 7 times in Raleigh, and then you decide no. But that was an experience I'll remember the rest of my life. And that's where that photo was taken, from the better wall, quote unquote, from that gentleman. You can still see the beautiful, beautiful original foundation of the great conservatory. Photograph of the Victoria lily growing inside the conservatory. So let's come home just for a few more minutes, then I'll let you go home and dream about this stuff. But has anybody ever been to the Mount Auburn Cemetery? Cambridge, Massachusetts. Okay, you better put it on your list because it's one of my favorite gardens in the world. Okay, Mount Auburn Cemetery was built in 1831. The Massachusetts Horticultural Society purchased 70 acres way out in the country. Cambridge. The Massachusetts Horticulture Society, along with Henry Dearborn, Jacob Bigelow, and Alexander Wadsworth, 3 prominent Bostonians, realized that the city of Boston had a serious problem with their dead people. There was no longer much space in the city to bury them, to lay them to rest. And so in 1831, the Massachusetts Horticultural Society put their heads together with a group of these individuals and said, hey, what if we created a pastoral setting, got some farmland, bought some land, made it into a place where people would be buried, and then created a beautiful garden? It's a great idea. Mount Auburn Cemetery was the first in the pastoral garden cemetery movement of the late 1800s. And now you can travel all over the country and you can visit cemeteries all over this country that were built based on this idea. The idea of being buried in a cemetery out where it's open under a tree started here at the Mount Auburn Cemetery. The rural cemetery idea started here. Experimental garden, of course, when you drive there now, it's far from rural. But it is beautiful. Began the American Public Parks and Gardens movement across the whole state, across the whole United States. There are 35 miles of walking and driving paths. You can drive through the Mount Auburn Cemetery. It has a huge, huge collection of woody ornamentals. Okay. What I love about this place is 174 acres, 100,000 people are buried there, 5,500 trees, 700 different species, varieties, and cultivars of plants, thousands of shrubs and herbaceous perennials, 220 species of birds, 10 miles of roads and paths. And all the roads and paths are listed, named for a plant. How cool is that? It's a wonderful place. And there's not a time where you would go to the Mount Auburn Cemetery of year where it's not just as beautiful, although I would opt for middle of May. It's a very green and colorful time at the Mount Auburn Cemetery.
Are there any famous people buried there?
Dorothea Dix. and a bunch of other famous people that I can't remember right now.
She had connections to Boston.
Apparently so. Yeah, she's buried there. And you can go up into a beautiful viewing tower and see a lot of the cemetery, and then look over and see the Boston skyline. So it's really quite a lovely experience. Those of you who may have gone to the Arnold Arboretum and never knew about that. So let's finish up talking about the father of American horticulture, Liberty Hyde Bailey. Liberty Hyde Bailey was born in 1858. He died in 1954. He grew up on a farm in Michigan. His father was an apple grower. He's a farmer. And his father grafted apples. And L.H. Bailey was so sickly as a young child. His mother died when he was a young child. He was so sickly, his father wouldn't allow him to work on the farm like his two brothers. And so he got to just kind of walk around. He became the little botanist of Michigan, for lack of a better term. He went out and he had this incredible memory. Okay? He attended Michigan Agricultural College in 1878, 1882, 1878. Think about Michigan Agricultural College. That was the land grant that had recently been formed in a place called East Lansing, Michigan. What is it today? Michigan State University. And so L.H. Liberty Hyde attended college there. And then in the summers, one summer he worked with the famous botanist Asia Gray as the assistant for Asia Gray for 2 years. Okay. Came back and was hired, with his bachelor's degree, was hired to teach at the Michigan Agricultural College. In 1885, he became a well-known master teacher. Back then, they didn't have split appointments, so he wrote for the local newspaper, and he also visited farmers and helped them solve problems. So he was kind of a teacher extension agent there. He was married, had 2 daughters. He met his wife the first day of class as a freshman at Michigan Agricultural College, and he coined the term 25-25-25-year plan, where L.H. Bailey said, one's life should be spent first 25 years educating, second 25 years working, third 25 years not in retirement, but doing what you want to do. And interestingly enough, L.H. Bailey retired from Cornell University at age 56 years old. So he was just a little bit off his plan. There he was as a young man. And if there's ever a feature movie written on the life of L.H. Bailey, I'm sad to say that the person I would have cast in his role passed away recently, Robin Williams. I think Robin Williams would have made a great L.H. Bailey. But there's L.H. with his, Matthew McConaughey, yeah, he could probably pull it off too. There he is with his family. In 1888, he became a professor at the university, at Cornell University, and then became the Dean of Agriculture there, and actually spent most of his time in the legislative building of the New York legislature, opting for funding for the College of Agriculture, and formed the first College of Agriculture at Cornell University. He wrote books. Encyclopedia of Horticulture in 1900. He was part of the founding of what our professional association called American Society for Horticultural Science in 1903. It gets better. In 1904, he founded the College of Agriculture. It was the first in the land, like I mentioned. In 1908, President Teddy Roosevelt had him chair a committee on rural development and commissioned him. The commission was on country life. Out of that commission came the Extension Smith-Lever Act of 1914, which founded the Cooperative Extension Service in the United States. L.H. Bailey he was all about ag education. We wouldn't have ag ed like we know it today if it weren't for L.H. Bailey. Okay? He was the Dean of Agriculture. He retired in 1913 and wrote most of his 65 books. Did you hear what I just said? He wrote most of his 65 books after he retired in 1913. Here he is traveling because he had this wonderful desire to travel. He wrote books on all different kinds of plants. And here he is traveling with his daughter. Here he is standing by all the books he ever wrote. Here I am standing by all the books I ever wrote. Me and L.H. Bailey, we're like one. Okay? He wrote 65 books, 1,300 journal articles, countless popular papers and newspaper articles. He developed a herbarium and donated it to Cornell. In 1935, had 140,000 specimens. There's elder L.H. Bailey. Guys, at age 96, L.H. Bailey was going to the bank to get traveler's checks to go back to South America to finish his book on palms when he fell on the steps and broke his hip. And that was the end of L.H. Bailey. Okay? That's why we call him the father of American horticulture. There he is. Now, the story about L.H. Bailey when he was a young professor at Michigan Agricultural College was when they hired him, they gave him a wagon and a horse for transportation. Okay? And he would the horse was a trotter, and he would go out on the horse, but the wagon was out of alignment. Okay? And so someone said, go into Lansing, there's this guy who fixes clocks, fixes wagons, right? Go in there, you'll see his shop, take it in there, he'll fix your wagon. So he took his wagon, he went there, and he got his wagon fixed, got in the wagon, off it went, straight as an arrow. Little did the father of American horticulture know that the father of the automotive industry fixed his wagon. Henry Ford. Doesn't that kind of give you chills? Right? L.H. Bailey didn't have any clue that it was Henry Ford. And if he did know, he knew Henry Ford, but he was just this fix-it guy. He wasn't going to be the man who invented or who changed it. So I'd like to finish talking about history by talking about ancient history. And I want to take you on a trip to the White Mountains in California. These are the White Mountains. They run about 10 to 12,000 feet tall. They look, if you stand on top of the White Mountains and you look west, the Sierra Nevadas are sitting there looking at you in the face, and Yosemite's not far away. Bishop, California is in a town in Owens Valley, where Owens Valley runs just like this, White Mountains of California. Now, back in the early 1950s, there was a man who went to the University of Arizona and got his degree and started studying a whole new revolutionary science in forestry called dendrochronology. Dendrochronology. And the whole concept behind dendrochronology is using the science of tree rings, that trees lay down cells and rings, using the science of tree rings to verify climatic events in the course of world history. And this man's name is Dr. Edmund Schulman. He became a pioneer in dendrochronology. And he wanted to see if he could find old trees. He started with redwoods, realized that they got too much moisture. He thought that trees that weren't under stress would be able to show in their growth rings climatic events better than those trees that were under high stress. Turned out he was absolutely wrong. He got it the wrong way. And so he started to search out for old trees, ancient trees. He heard rumors that there were trees up in the Nevada, Utah, and California mountains that were thousands of years old. He said he didn't believe it, but he started to venture up into those mountains. He went up into the White Mountains, and he started to look for these trees. So just as a little bit of a background here, there's Lake Tahoe, there's Mono Lake. The bristlecone pines are, this dot moved a little bit, the wind was blowing pretty hard. The dot should be right there, okay? There's Owen Valley, there's Owens Lake, Death Valley's down here, so this mountain range right along the Nevada border, okay? They're the Sierra Nevadas. They're a much younger mountain range than the White Mountains, okay? If you're driving up to the White Mountains, you look across Owen Valley, there's the Sierra Nevada. Taller, more sharp, okay? And you go up, here's what happened. Schulman went up there and he found this monoculture of trees that were identified. He identified them as bristlecone pines, not Pinus aristata, the bristlecones that are in California have the common name bristlecone. Pinus longeva, okay? And here were these trees. They looked craggly and ugly and looked kind of old, but half dead. And he started to take samples, and the foresters at the time had invented a tool where you could inject it into a tree, pull it out, and look at the growth rings. So you wouldn't have to cut the tree down to count the rings, okay, called an increment borer. And then you had samples, and with your microscope, you could look at the rings. Okay. They started to sample trees, 2,000, 2,300, and then after a couple of years in 1957, the tree he named Methuselah was well over 4,600 years. 4,600-year-old living tree. They actually got excited and started doing cores on dead trees. And they found a 7,500-year-old dead, the tree died when it was 7,500 years old. They've since found trees as old as 5,600 years up in this area at 10,000 feet. It's called the Inyo National Forest, and here's the monoculture. 4 inches of rain a year in snow, 100% dolomitic limestone soil with very little competition, insect or disease pests, and yet the trees have figured out a way to live in this very narrow environment. Okay? I've been twice. I went in 1996 when I was in sabbatic, And the man who told me to go here before I go to the San Francisco Botanical Garden was the late J.C. Ralston. He said, if you're going to go to the West Coast, he said, if you're going to go see things, and if you have limited time, go to the bristlecone pine forest. You'll learn more about how plants grow than you will anywhere else. It's a majestic place. So I went in 96, and then I got the opportunity to go back in 2016. And here's a photograph of the hike. It's a 4-mile hike through the Schulman Grove, right? And you go through the Methuselah Grove, and the oldest living tree is not labeled. I have a photo of this tree. I just don't know which one it is. I've taken hundreds and hundreds of photos on my hike. People are wondering, is this guy ever going to make it? It took me hours. This tree might be, this tree might be. But this is the kind of terrain. And you're hiking at altitude. I was exhausted at the end of the day. Okay? Bristlecone pine, Pinus longeva. The oldest one now has been dated 5,067 years old. I don't know if it's that one, but that's what they look like. Now, y'all listen very carefully, because this tree tells us a lot of lessons. In fact, geriatric scientists are up in the bristlecone pine forest studying these trees, trying to figure out what it is about them why they live so long. Do you know why they live so long? This tree allows parts of itself to die so the whole can live. Did you hear what I just said? Biologically, this tree allows parts of itself to die so the whole can live. Is that not like sacrificial giving? Is that not maybe a commentary for society today, that maybe we need to deny ourselves a little bit so the whole can do better? I'm just talking biology here. I'm not talking politics. But look at the tree. This is a young one. They're not struggling along. They're vigorous. They just don't have enough resource to keep the whole plant alive, so they allow part of it to die so they can live. There's some cones. You weren't allowed to pick up cones or sticks from the ground. However, if you come to my office. So I'm at my desk, my office in our home, and my wife's, and I'm making arrangements to go to San Francisco and visit these gardens. And she says, "You going to the old tree place?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "The bristlecone pine forest?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Isn't that the place where the trees like grow 4,000 years?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "So when were you there the last time?" I said, 20 years ago. She said, "Well, why are you going back?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, not a whole lot will change." She said, "It seems to me it'd be a waste of time." And I said, "No, I go there, I get chills. It rejuvenates me. It's a special place." And so this is a photograph that a colleague took of me next to this potentially Methuselah. I don't know, but I'm going to say it is. Look, there I am. Okay. Please, this is not a power line. This happened when the slide got scanned. Okay. So I went 2016, came back, and I had more slides. And I'm in my little office in the sunroom going through my slides, and my wife's over my shoulder looking at them. She says, "Well, they do look a lot like the slides you have from 1996. And then I found this slide. Y'all look at this really carefully, okay? In this ancient forest, see these trees here? See these here? There? Whoops. Same dang tree. 20 years, nothing's changed. So she was right. Yes. So before you say, "Oh, just a bunch of ugly trees," if you know the story behind the tree, it makes it the most beautiful looking plant I've ever seen. So if somebody said to me today, "Name a place you'd like to go right here, right now, anywhere in the world," it would be back here. And I'll finish tonight's presentation by telling you a very quick story. When J.C. Ralston passed away, he was cremated and had his remains split into 4 pieces, four containers. One went to a garden in Germany, his favorite garden in Germany. Another one went home to Oklahoma, to a family homestead graveyard. One set came here, sprinkled here. Guess where the 4th was? Right here. Now, if that doesn't give you chills, I don't know what does. So if you want to hear more about the history and the exciting things that people and events and cultures have done, consider maybe taking the course that starts March 19th to April 30th, Monday nights at 6:30 to 8:30 right here in this very building. With that, I thank you for your attention, because nobody fell asleep.
Are there any questions for Bryce?
Before the exam?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
About, you say it's a monoculture and it's just totally dolomitic lime. How does something like that survive in such an alkaline thing?
It's remarkable, the whole environment. It's not just the soil, but the limited rainfall, the temperature, the wind. It's like this perfect storm, and these trees have been able to adapt to that environment. And I think what's really helped them is that they have no competition.
Okay.
Yeah, but I have not read enough about the soil science of this area, but the soils are high in dolomitic limestone. It's really quite remarkable, being that it's a pine tree.
Yeah, because I think conifers like acidic, don't they?
Right. Very unique. They've had well over 4,000 years to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. But actually, yeah, I wasn't kidding. Geriatric scientists are studying these trees. They're trying to figure out what level of stress we need to be under to help us live longer, because there's something about the stress environment that they're experiencing that does that. Yes, sir?
Look at all those beautiful pictures that people have.
You know what? You have to work real hard. You have to get up really early, and you have to position yourself. And it's interesting. Are you saying that as a positive or a negative? I'm just curious. Positive, okay. Because my wife, when I come back from trips, my wife always says, "Where are the people?" So, no, I mean, for illustration and teaching purposes, I try to get people out, unless I need them for perspective. But yeah, just have to get up early and stay late. Anything else?
Doesn't look like it, Bryce.
Okay.
Thank you so very much.